haven't had a chance, but Mr. Graham suggested we drive around by the school and get her. Then she can see how she likes it too. And if Carol thinks so, we'll get mother not to ask any questions, but just trust to us. Gee, that guy's great. He's got a head on him. Some lark, what?" "Yes, he's been very kind," said Shirley. "At first I told him I couldn't let him take so much trouble for us, but he said he was going to take his sister out for a ride." "A girl? Aw, gee! I'm going to beat it!" George stopped in his eager walk back and forth across the office and seized his old faded cap. "George, stop! You mustn't be impolite. Besides, I think she's only a very little girl, probably like Doris. He called her his kid sister." You can't tell. I ain't going to run any risks. I better beat it." But George's further intentions were suddenly brought to a finish by the entrance of Mr. Sidney Graham. "Well, Miss Hollister," he said with a smile, "we are ready at last. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting so long, but there was something wrong with one of my tires, and the chauffeur had to run around to the garage. Come on, George," he said to the boy, who hung shyly behind now, wary of any lurking female who might be haunting the path. "Guess you'll have to sit in the front seat with me and help me drive. The chauffeur has to go back and drive for mother. She has to go to some tea or other." George suddenly forgot the possible girl and followed his new hero to the elevator with a swelling soul. What would the other fellows at the store think of him? A whole half holiday, an automobile ride, and a chance to sit in the front and learn to drive. But all he said was, "Aw, gee, yeah, sure thing." The strange girl suddenly loomed on his consciousness again as they emerged from the elevator and came out on the street. She was sitting in the great back seat alone, arrayed in a big blue velvet coat the color of her eyes, and George felt at once all hands and feet. She was a slender wisp of a thing about Carol's age, with a lily complexion and a wealth of gold hair caught in a blue veil. She smiled very prettily when her brother introduced her as Elizabeth. There was nothing snobbish or disagreeable about her, but that blue velvet coat suddenly made George conscious of his own common attire, and gave Shirley a pang of dismay at her own little shabby suit. However, Sidney Graham soon covered all differences in the attire of his guests by insisting that they should don the two long blanket coats that he handed them, and somehow when George was seated in the big leather front seat with that great handsome coat around his shoulders, he did not much mind the blue velvet girl behind him, and mentally resolved to earn enough to get Carol a coat like it some day, only Carol should be pink or red to go with her black eyes and pink cheeks. After all, it was Shirley, not George, who felt embarrassment over the strange girl and wished she had not come. She was vexed with herself for it too. It was foolish to let a child no older than Carol fluster her so, but the thought of a long ride alone on that back seat with the dainty young girl actually frightened her. But Elizabeth was not frightened. She had been brought up in the society atmosphere and was at home with people always, everywhere. She tucked the robes about her guest, helped Shirley button the big, soft, dark blue coat about her, remarking that it got awfully chilly when they were going, and somehow before Shirley had been able to think of a single word to say in response, the conversation seemed to be moving along easily without her aid. "Sid says we're going to pick up your sister from her school. I'm so glad. How old is she? About my age? Won't that be delightful? I'm rather lonesome this spring because all my friends are in school. I've been away at boarding school and got the measles. Wasn't that too silly for a great big girl like me? And the doctor said I couldn't study any more this spring on account of my eyes. It's terribly lonesome. I've been home 6 weeks now, and I don't know what to do with myself. What's your sister's name? Carol? Carol Hollister? That's a pretty name. Is she the only sister you have? A baby sister? How sweet! What's her name? Oh, I think Doris is the cutest name ever. Doris Hollister. Why don't we go and get Doris? Wouldn't she like to ride too? Oh, it's too bad your mother is ill, but of course she wouldn't want to stay all alone in the house without some of her family." Elizabeth was tactful. She knew at a glance that trained nurses and servants could not be plentiful in a family where the young people wore such plain, old-style garments. She gave no hint of such a thought, however. "That's your brother," she went on, nodding toward George. "I've got another brother, but he's 17 and away at college, so I don't see much of him. Sid's very good to me when he has time, and often he takes me to ride. We're awfully jolly chums, Sid and I. Is this the school where your sister goes? She's in high school then, the 3rd year? My, she must be bright. I've only finished my 2nd. Does she know she's going with us? What fun to be called out of school by a surprise! Oh, I just know I'm going to like her." Shirley sat dumb with amazement, and listened to the eager gush of the lively girl, wondered what shy Carol would say, trying to rouse herself to answer the young questioner in the same spirit in which she asked questions. George came out with Carol in a very short time, Carol struggling into her coat and trying to straighten her hat, while George mumbled in her ear as he helped her clumsily. "Some baby doll out there. Kid, you better preen your feathers. She's been gassing with Shirley to beat the band. I couldn't hear all they said, but she asked a lot about you. You should worry. Hold up your head and don't flicker an eyelash. You're as good as she is any day if you don't look all dolled up like a new saloon. But she's some looker. Pretty as a red wagon. Her brother's a peach of a fellow. He's going to let me run the car when we get out of the city limit. And say, Shirley says for me to tell you we're going out to look at a barn where we're going to move this summer, and you're not to say a word about its being a barn. See? Get on to that sky blue pink satin scarf she's got around her head. Ain't she some chicken, though?" " Hush, George! She'll hear you," murmured Carol in dismay. " What do you mean about a barn? How could we live in a barn?" " You just shut up and saw wood, kid, and you'll see. Shirley thinks she's got onto something pretty good." Then Carol was introduced to the beautiful blue velvet girl and sat down beside her, wrapped in a soft furry cloak of garnet, to be whirled away into a fairyland of wonder. CHAPTER VII